As some form of a potential comparison before I start this story, I want you to picture the scenario that I am about to tell. Let's say that you're a Manchester United fan, as blasphemous as that actually sounds, in 2008, and you've just won the league and the Champions League with everything looking good in terms of on the pitch and, to some extent, off the pitch matters as well. All of a sudden though, the next season is an absolute train wreck and they finish in last, although the club is spared from relegation owing to a few other clubs going to administration. However, debts accrued under the Glazers' ownership suddenly begin to spiral out of control, players continue to leave the club at an alarmingly rapid rate, performances subsequently drop, and within 3 years of winning the league and indeed the Champions League, they have a relegation playoff match against Swansea to save themselves from the drop. They lose it, and with that, Manchester United, a behemoth of an institution within the English, European and global game, are sent down to the Championship for the first time in their history. Although of course it is worth noting that, just in case some of you do point out a factual error, United were actually relegated as recently as 1974, but just run with it for now. I'm well aware that this probably won't happen to Manchester United over the coming years, but the scenario I just outlined, albeit with a few minor tweaks here and there, is what happened to Argentinian giants River Plate in 2011. Somehow, even in a league that is literally organised in a manner that makes it more difficult for more historical and successful teams to be relegated for reasons I will get into later on, they still manage to fall through the trapdoor, and serves a reminder that no matter how successful your club is, there is no such thing as being, quote, too big to fail. It was undoubtedly one of the most shocking football moments of all time, but how exactly did it happen? Well, you're about to find out. Club Atlético River Plate were founded by immigrants of the dock area of the Rio de la Plata all the way back in 1901, and they are named after the English translation of that particular area. They were the first of the 5 so-called grandes of Argentinian football to be established, with Racing Club being formed in 1903, Independiente and River's eternal rivals Boca Juniors both coming into being in 1905, and San Lorenzo tracing their roots back to 1908. The Grandes, for those of you who aren't aware or haven't figured it out by now, are simply the biggest sporting clubs in Argentina, and between them they have won 119 out of the 180 championships of any kind which have been held in the country. Out of those 5 teams, and indeed across the whole of Argentina, River Plate have won the most to date, with 36 titles just edging out Boca Juniors' tally of 34. River Plate have always been known in Argentina for differing from the norm in terms of their style and play, as whilst those around them have been much more rugged and physical in terms of their approaches to the sport, especially in years gone by, they have always had a swagger, substance and attacking verve to their play. They became the club of the aristocrats, having moved away from the docks early on in their history to a more middle class area in Núñez, and whilst Boca abused River's abandonment of their working class roots as a stick with which to beat them, River very much used it to their advantage, certainly in Argentina's early days of professionalism with regard to the transfer market. They would break the world transfer record in 1932, merely 3 years after professionalism in Argentina was formalised, with the signing of Bernabé Ferreira costing 35,000 pesos, equivalent to £23,000 at the time, which was a worldwide record which stood for 17 years, albeit there was a war of some sort going on, which may well have contributed to that record's longevity. Their lavish spending contributed to their nickname of Los Millonarios, or the Millionaires in English, and they would win their second title in that 1932 season. During the 1940s, the club was dubbed La Máquina for a combination of its style of play and immense success, with the famous front five of Juan Carlos Muñoz, Felix Lostau, Adolfo Pedernera, Angela Bruna and José Manuel Moreno, later supplemented by the likes of Alfredo Di Stefano, heralding 4 league titles in that decade. Over the course of the next 6 decades, the club would win at least 3 titles in 5 of them, with the only exception being during the 1960s, and throughout their history, they have come runners-up on 34 occasions, which is another record. In 1983, noticing the decline of a couple of the Grandes, most notably San Lorenzo, who, in 1980, were the first out of the 5 to ever be relegated, as well as Racing Club, who would follow suit a few years later, the Argentine FA acted swiftly, as a perennial decline of each of them would mean fewer fans attending the matches and, more importantly, less income to and attention on the league. As such, they brought in a new relegation system called the Promedio, or average, whereby instead of clubs being relegated by finishing the bottom few places of a particular league season by season, which is how the vast majority of leagues worldwide operate, relegation would now be decided on a points per season average over the course of the previous 3 campaigns, with the 2 or 3 teams with the lowest average suffering direct relegation. If it hadn't have been introduced, River would actually have been relegated in 1983 after finishing second from bottom of the league, but their points per season average over the previous 3 campaigns saw them cling on to their top flight status, albeit at the expense of another grande in the form of Racing. That would have been the first relegation in Rival's illustrious history, but they used it as a stark warning as to what could happen if they weren't careful, and immediately returned to their former glories, as they won 8 of the 19 league trophies on offer to them during the course of the 1990s. It seemed as though nothing could go wrong for them, especially after winning a further 5 Clausadas during the 2000s, with their last league title in that decade in 2008 coming under the guidance of current Atletico Madrid manager Diego Simeone. Indeed, if you visit the history subpage on their official website, a loading screen comes up with the message, "Our history is too big. So many years of glory can take long to load," which gives some indication as to how proud an institution they are and how influential and successful they have been. Right up until the roof fell in. Immediately after that 2008 Clausada triumph, key players such as goalkeeper Juan Pablo Carrizo, Aelior Ortega and Alexis Sanchez would depart, and in the following season Apertura, the club only won 2 matches out of 19, drawing 8 and losing the other 9 to finish last in the league for the first time in their history. Simeone resigned 14 matches in, unable to turn the tide, and although their fortunes would improve in the Clausada, they still only came in 8th in that particular league, and across the 2 half seasons combined, they had only accrued 41 points. Their form over the previous 2 seasons kept them well clear of the relegation zone, but in 2009-10, reports came out that the incumbent president, Jose Manuel Aguilar, had burdened the club with over $75 million worth of debt. He left in December 2009 to be replaced by club icon Daniel Pasarea, a no-nonsense defender in his playing days who had lifted the World Cup as Argentina captain in 1978 and who had given 16 years of service to River as either a player or a manager. However, his reign would prove to be even more chaotic over the coming year and a half, with his first 2 managers, namely Leonardo Estrada and Angel Capa, lasting just 6 months each, and by 2011 they were still an estimated $19 million in debt. Perhaps as a result of this off-the-pitch instability, in 2009-10 they would only do marginally better across the course of the 2 tournaments than in 2008-2009, as their overall total of 43 points put them in 14th and in 13th in the Apertura and the Clausura respectively, with them finishing about 20 points off top spots in both of them. They still had their successful 2007-2008 season to hold on to, which helped them stave off relegation, although they were sinking fast, and with the appointment of JJ Lopez as club manager in October 2010, the club finally woke up to their perilous predicament and changed their style. Lopez immediately made the club a defensive unit that Tony Pulis himself would have been proud of, as they finished 4th in the 2010-11 Apertura on 31 points despite scoring just 21 goals, and although it was unquestionably an antithesis to their usual style of play, it was, in times like these, a necessary evil. The Clausura, however, would see them improve even more as they were top by match week 9, something which looked to have steered them clear of any relegation worries. However, their form fell off a cliff, and in their final 7 games of the season, they would only gain 4 points to end up on 26 overall, with only 15 goals scored and 15 conceded across their 19 games. Their 3-season total of 141 points, an average of 1.237 points per game, was only 4 points away from being enough to stay up automatically, but there was another chance of salvation for the El Monumental outfit, as they had done enough to put themselves in the relegation playoff for that season against second-tier outfit Belgrano. Even though they had been sleepwalking for a while, they had managed to give themselves one last opportunity to avoid what just a few seasons ago, and indeed throughout the vast majority of their history, had seemed unimaginable. The fans were hopeful that the club could at least start off well in this playoff, but in the first leg away from home, Rival lost 2-0, with masked Barras, who were essentially ultras, running onto the pitch partway through the match to attack their own players and forcing the game to be halted for around 20 minutes. All was not completely lost though, as a 2-goal win at their home ground would see them drag themselves out of the mire, and they were welcomed onto the pitch by fervent but clearly desperate fans at El Monumental, with whistles ringing out for the Belgrano players, drowning out anything that the travelling contingent could muster up upon their entrance. Within 5 minutes, they looked to be on their way to the great escape, as Mariano Pavon turned his marker and fired a shot from just outside the box into the bottom corner, and the fans could believe again. However, frustratingly for the home support, it remained that way up until the 61st minute, but it wouldn't be the hegemonic force for so long in Argentinian football who had established a 2-goal lead. Instead, it would be the underdogs who once again gained the upper hand, as Guillermo Fade volleyed in a close-range effort through the legs of River's goalkeeper Carrizo, who rejoined the club on loan from Lazio that season, to tie the game up. Panic stations set in, but they were given an opportunity to haul themselves back into contention after a penalty was given 5 minutes after Belgrano's equaliser for a push on Leandro Caruso. Upon watching the foul, it did look very soft to me, but given the hectic state of the crowd, I don't really think the referee had much of a choice in the matter, and who knows what may have happened to him had he not given it. Their goal scorer Pavon stepped up to take it, but Belgrano's goalkeeper saved what was a rather unconvincing spot kick, and as the minutes ticked by, so too did the patience of River's fans. The tears began to flow amongst both sets of supporters, River's of desperation and Belgrano's, who were watching their team cause perhaps the biggest upset in South American football of all time, of pure elation. On Radio Mitre, a radio station in Buenos Aires, the commentator Atilio Costafebre frequently referred to the people associated with River in a professional capacity as, quote, rats and, another quote, sons of bitches, even going so far as to say that they were all motherfuckers who had beaten the shit out of the club and thieves who had stolen money from it. He refused to name the main focus of his diatribe owing to being a journalist, but then he named him anyway, Daniel Passarella, although it was pretty obvious beforehand that it was the president whom his rant was aimed at. The final whistle for that game would never be blown, as fans, unable to take it anymore, started to turn to violence. In the 89th minute, they began throwing objects at the players and trashing the stadium, even ripping out seats and using them as weapons in fights and clambering over the razor wire which had been set up to prevent fans from invading the pitch. The 2,200 strong police force in attendance, reportedly the highest ever number for an Argentinian football match, responded with high-power water cannons which they continued to use upon the fans exiting the stadium in order to disperse the crowds. There had been suggestions that the game could be played behind closed doors to prevent such scenes from occurring, especially given that Argentina were due to host the upcoming Copa America a month later, but they were summarily dismissed by the authorities prior to the match. Meanwhile, the players simply stood on the pitch in tears, unable to comprehend what had just happened, but it was true. River had been relegated for the first time in their history in a system that was set up specifically for that not to happen. The Belgrano players, who in normal circumstances would have been celebrating wildly on the pitch at this point, had to be escorted off the field for their own safety as the anger and violence continued, which left 89 people injured and 55 others detained. Despite intense clamours in the aftermath of the game for both Passarella and Lopez to resign, only one of them did so, and it wasn't the by now reviled president. He stuck around for River's first ever season in the Premier B, but mercifully for the club, and possibly for the Argentinian football authorities as well, given the significant financial hit both club and league would have taken as a result of the relegation, they won the league by 1 point ahead of Quilmes, being promoted back to the Primera División straight away. They have since got their heads screwed back on, and although they have only won one more Argentinian championship since their promotion back in 2014, they've also lifted 2 Copa Libertadores titles in the decade since that ignominious day, once in 2015 and the other in 2018. However, their fierce rivals Boca, who even penned a song in celebration of River's relegation, can always point to the fact that, even if they are relegated at some point in the future, which, as River have shown, is not impossible, they weren't the ones who suffered that fate first out of themselves and River Plate. I guess it serves Passarella right for banning homosexuals from his Argentina squad in the 1990s. That about wraps up today's video on possibly the most shocking relegation of all time, and certainly one of the most shocking relegations of all time. If you have any other stories that you want me to explore in great depth, let me know which ones down in the comments below, or indeed on any of my social medias, any of them like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All of them can be found in the description down below. And whilst you are there, if you did enjoy this video, hit the like button and subscribe while you are at it, and ring that notification bell so you get notified whenever I upload a video straight away. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.